All right, welcome, welcome. We're all going to try and wrap our heads around what just happened last night with the NBA draft lottery. It was obviously very different than what we expected. If you listened to my episode yesterday, I talked about possible outcomes, just briefly about, who could react what way based on the way the lottery plays out. And I think I said something along the lines of, it just better not be Dallas. And then that was really all I said for that. And then, of course, it's Dallas. And then it's San Antonio, and then Philadelphia, and then finally an actual rebuilding team in Charlotte to get the fourth pick. And that's just the way the top four shaked out. I was yelling at my TV saying, just no, every time one of those teams hopped into the top three, except for Charlotte. I was really hoping that at least a rebuilding team would get it. Charlotte tends to get the number two pick in really good classes, and they couldn't even get that. I mean, if you look back at history, they got the number two pick in the Wemby year. They got number two pick in the Anthony Davis year. I think there was one or two others like that. Things just never go well for them. But we have three teams that could be legitimate contenders next year and would have potentially made some noise in the playoffs this year if all of them were healthy. Now with the top three picks in this draft, we've got Matt Lawson here to go through our first mock draft, post-draft lottery. We're going to go through the first 14 picks. All the lottery teams give our thoughts on who we think these teams should take and then how that could impact dynasty leagues, who based on who's already there, and as well for these new prospects. But before I bring in Matt, I just want to remind you guys that Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all your sports betting action. We've got baseball season going on. We've got the NHL and, of course, the NBA playoffs going on. Tonight, we've got Game 4 of the Cavs-Pacers series as well as Game 4 of the Nuggets-Thunder series. The Cavs are favored currently by 7.5 for this game. Donovan Mitchell is questionable. Excuse me, this would be Game 5 then, I guess. I don't know why I said Game 4. Donovan Mitchell's questionable. It's obviously going to be a big factor here, coming off an incredibly massive blowout loss. We'll see how they respond at home. Top team in the East. I'm expecting a good response, whether or not Donovan Mitchell's there. We'll just see if that's enough to keep their season alive. And then, of course, the Thunder Nuggets series, which has been kind of a mix of tightly contested as well as a one blowout in there. So we'll see how that goes. Thunder have regained home court advantage. We'll see if they can keep that and take advantage of that, or if Denver's championship experience is going to help them out in that series. If you want to get in on the action for those games, BetOnline's a great place to do that. They have the largest selection of odds and everything from the MLB to the NHL and UFC. BetOnline remains the number one online source for all your sports wagering info. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right. I'm going to go ahead and bring in Matt, and we're going to do our mock draft. But before we do that, it's the second year in a row. I mean, we can go back further to show the results for that, with Detroit getting the fifth pick for however many years in a row they did. But the last two seasons, it was the Hawks winning the lottery with a 3% chance, and now the Mavs winning with a 1.8% chance. What do we do, Matt? How do we fix this?
Well, I think that the system wasn't broken before. The NBA got skittish because teams were tanking. And, there was pearl clutching at the idea of teams intentionally not trying to put out winning lineups. I think Sam Hinkie's Sixers especially put that into a spotlight. And the reaction was, well, let's flatten the lottery odds. That's going to make it so teams aren't going to tank. We'll have more competitive basketball. That hasn't happened, because the reality is all of the incentive is still there, even with flattened lottery odds, for teams to be able to drop down to the bottom of the standings so that they can, at worst, get the number 5 pick. That's what the Utah Jazz did this year. They made sure that they secured that number 5 pick, and that's exactly what they ended up with. That happened to the Pistons multiple times. Even when they were trying to win, they still had the worst record in the league, and they still ended up at that number 5 pick, other than the year that they ended up with Cade Cunningham. So if we want teams to get better through the draft, which is the whole point of having a draft, if we want to make sure that they're able to improve, get out of the NBA basement, and have some hope for these franchises' fans, we need to be able to allow them to be able to do it. There's no reason to not go back to the better lottery odds that still will have tanking. We're still going to have it, but it's going to make it a far more likely that the worst teams are going to get players that are going to allow them to ascend, rather than just having them add complementary starters in the later part of the lottery. Let them get the players players that are actually going to allow them to be able to rise back up and be competitive in the NBA, rather than having a system that gets to be able to reward mediocrity and allows teams that maybe just missed the play-in, fell out in the play-in game, and didn't make it into the playoffs to be able to jump up and get a premium player without really having to feel the pain of bottoming out as a roster.
Yeah, it allowed three teams that were just kind of screwed by injuries, but also one team that traded away a generational talent to just luck into another generational talent. Just they went from Dirk to Luca, had a 2.5 month gap with only Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving there, and now they have another generational talent to build around. And Cooper Flag does fit the mantra of defense wins championship. So it would be pretty surprising if Nico Harrison did pass on him or trade him away. Although I know that idea is going to be tossed around on a win now team. But yeah, it doesn't really solve anything. It's funny that you mentioned the Sixers were the team that kind of introduced tanking, and now they're getting rewarded by the flattened lottery odds system, where they were able to hop in, keep their top six protected first, and add a really talented player to an already very talented team.
I think the other big story here is that there's a very strong chance that any number of the top three picks could be traded. I think there's strong incentive for the Dallas Mavericks to consider it. I don't think they will. I think they'll take Cooper Flag. I think that there's a very good chance that the Spurs and the Sixers consider trading the number 2 and number 3 picks. They could stay there. They have talent that they could take at those positions, but that's going to be a lot of the discussion that's coming up pre-draft here about the potential of trades, not only from teams that are outside of those top few picks that are going to want to move up. Some of the bad teams that got pushed out of the top 4 picks in the lottery wanting to try to come back in, but the potential of teams with stars like the Milwaukee Bucks and Giannis Antetokounmpo wanting to come up into those positions and have that be part of the package that they get back for Giannis. That's going to be a lot of the discussion going forward. And we're not going to know until around draft night, on draft night, if that's going to be the way that this plays out. But it certainly added a level of intrigue that I think there's a lot of incentive for both the San Antonio Spurs and also the Philadelphia 76ers to consider trading those picks to be able to accelerate their ability to be able to contend and win now.
Yeah, I think specifically for Dallas, just with the way the CBA is, having a player like Cooper Flag added in on a rookie deal is actually going to be something that probably makes it. I mean, would you rather have Cooper Flag on a rookie deal or Giannis making $60 million a year trying to fit that in? It ends up being more of a conversation. But I think with San Antonio and Philadelphia specifically, it's just going to come down to what type of offer they can get. I think San Antonio looking at some sort of package that they could send potentially to bring in Giannis to San Antonio. That's already been rumored. I think that makes sense for Milwaukee, who doesn't really have any future to build around. They need to get something back in a trade. San Antonio has extra draft picks. That type of trade probably makes sense for both sides. And then Philadelphia, it's just going to depend on how other teams value whoever would be there at number 3, which would be probably anybody but Cooper Flag and Dylan Harper, more than likely. And do they see potentially a guy like Ace Bailey as the clear number 3, or is it more of a mix of guys that maybe discourages teams from giving up enough value for Philadelphia, but to potentially accept an offer like that?
Yeah, I think with Dallas at number 1, there's a path for them to be able to contend with Cooper Flag on that rookie contract. It fits within the window, especially by the 26-27 season, assuming they have Kyrie Irving back healthy, Anthony Davis still at the very tail end of his prime, Kyrie Irving at the tail end of his prime, Cooper Flag coming into his own, kind of the way that we saw Victor Wembanyama in his second year, near the end of his first year, kind of raising up to that all NBA level. We could see Cooper Flag coming up to that level where he's at an all-star or even an all NBA level in his second or third season. That could be enough to be able to put them over the top if they get that premium season and availability from both Kyrie Irving and Anthony Davis for them to be a contender in that window. And then after his rookie contract, that's when you're kind of done with the Kyrie Irving, Anthony Davis primes, and it just becomes Cooper Flag's team after that point. Once he's on his second contract, it becomes entirely about building around him, so they get that extra life. It's an incredible opportunity for the Mavericks because they get to both get this window with Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving, now with another premium player who fits into their cost structure, and then they get the extended life of Cooper Flag's career on that second contract and beyond.
Yeah, it feels a little bit to me like the way that the Celtics had things going when they first added Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum is they have this win now team that's was like made the Eastern Conference Finals in Jason Tatum's rookie year. And now it could be something similar in Dallas where they have this team that can contend in the West, but they also have this generational rookie who can carry the franchise after. That's going to be great experience for him. It's honestly maybe not the best situation early on as far as maximizing his like stat output, but long term, that's going to be great for Cooper Flag's growth.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
All right. We are going to go ahead and get into this mock draft. I'm going to go ahead and put this on the screen so anybody that is watching can see the picks that we make. And I think we talked about this before, Matt, that I'm going to do or take the number 1 pick. And I know we just kind of talked about Dallas, talked about Cooper Flag, talked about the way it's going to fit. I'm just going to go ahead and make that selection. But it is going to be kind of interesting to see how he fits in or how they operate with this lineup, because they'll have Derek Lively, they'll have Anthony Davis, they'll have Cooper Flag, PJ Washington, Klay Thompson, Kyrie Irving when he gets healthy. So how does this starting lineup work? I don't really foresee Cooper Flag coming off the bench. I don't see Anthony Davis coming off the bench. So I could really see this being where Derek Lively's almost pushed into a reserve role, but still plays a significant amount of minutes. PJ Washington maybe ends up either in a reserve role or starting at kind of the small forward in a combo forward with Cooper Flag and PJ Washington. That's still incredible defensively. Or could even see PJ Washington being moved in another trade that kind of brings in some more guard help until Kyrie Irving gets healthy. Dallas has options. They have an excess of front court talent, and now they can add to make their backcourt a little bit better until Kyrie Irving gets healthy.
I think this is pretty simple in Dallas. Cooper Flag is going to start from day one. Anthony Davis is going to start from day one. And honestly, I see no reason to think that they are not going to put Derek Lively out there, have a supersized lineup. We've seen 2 big lineups thriving in the NBA, and this is an extremely switchable, huge lineup. Defensively, it's going to be devastating to be able to have the 3 of them out there because you can switch multiple positions with them. They can play multiple defensive schemes. There's an extremely high level of intensity in defensive playmaking, and offensively, it can work as well because Cooper Flag is immediately going to be put into position to be playing heavily on ball the way that he did at Duke. For fantasy, this is the ideal situation in many ways for Cooper Flag. I think some people might have had pause. Well, don't we want him on a really bad team? He's going to need to have the ball in his hands on this team. We saw Najee Marshall having to create mid-range shots at the end of the season once Kyrie Irving was out to be able to give them some semblance of offense. He is going to need to score for this team immediately, and he's going to be on the floor for significant minutes. And there's not going to be a risk of them trying to tank and pulling the ripcord on the season like he would have had if he would have gone to a team that had no other talent on it. So this is not only going to be your dynasty number 1 rookie rankings pick. He's going to go number 1 in all rookie drafts. He's going to have the opportunity for one of the better rookie fantasy seasons that we've seen in season-long leagues in a long time, because this is a fantasy stat set with no weaknesses. A player is going to help you across all 9 categories, be a big-time points league producer because of his rebounding ability, scoring ability, the assists that you're getting. Everything is there for Cooper Flag to be able to have a top fantasy season right out of the gate for a team where he's going to be playing a huge minute role.
Yeah, I think the playmaking aspect is actually something that I just totally went over my head. The fact that Duke didn't even really have a true point guard because Cooper Flag was one of their primary playmakers as well. And now he'll get that chance in Dallas. We'll go ahead and move on to the number 2 pick of San Antonio. This is on you, Matt. Who do you got?
All right. I think the only question here is who is picking at number 2. Assuming that San Antonio stays here, I still think they're taking Dylan Harper. The question then is fit. This is a team that has the rookie of the year in Stephen Castle and just traded for De'Aaron Fox. The overlap of these players, it doesn't entirely work. And it's because none of them are a particularly strong off-ball player. Stephen Castle has some cutting ability, but he's not a strong catch-and-shoot three-point shooter. That's not necessarily De'Aaron Fox's game. He's going to want to have the ball in his hands. You're going to be running pick and pop, pick and roll with Victor Wembanyama, pushing it in transition, getting it to the rim. And Dylan Harper is one of the best rim attack guard prospects that we've seen in recent memory in the draft. An excellent finisher, good size at 6'5" with a +6 wingspan. He is ready to take it to the rim and get there with ease and finish at the rim in the NBA as a rookie. But you don't really see how that fit works. Defensively, makes a little bit more sense because Harper has good size and wingspan, and Castle has the ability to be able to guard up and defend larger players as well. I think there's some ability for it to work defensively, but offensively, it's not what you're looking for. I think ultimately they're going to keep Dylan Harper. I think they're going to probably look to move on from Stephen Castle in a package to be able to add one more star piece to this while they have Dylan Harper on a rookie contract. And you're going to see the Spurs really push in with Fox, Harper, Wembanyama, and whatever they're able to add on the trade market to be able to kind of complete what this team looks like in contention in the next couple of years. But that remains to be seen. Regardless, Harper's going to be the number 2 pick in your rookie drafts. He should be the number 2 pick. He's going to have a strong fantasy season as well, probably more of kind of like a top 100 season, because honestly, this isn't the ideal fit for short-term production. He's going to be at best the number 3 usage guy on this team in the short term with Box, with Wembanyama. He's going to be third in line at best. Castle also is a guy who wants to try to eat up usage if he stays on this team and they give that fit a shot for a season. So this isn't going to be ideal early on. There's going to be need to be some degree of patience, but this is a really, really good guard prospect who's going to be a long-term big minute starter with a strong fantasy stat set. You want to take him number 2 in your rookie drafts. Be patient, wait for things to settle out in San Antonio or wherever he ends up in this draft if there is a trade, because Dylan Harper is going to be a star in fantasy for a long time.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a logjam if they don't make a trade. So that's why it just seems so logical for them to make a trade. And we mentioned it earlier in the show about the Giannis rumors. Would a package of Stephon Castle, maybe pick 14 future picks, would that be enough for them, or would the Bucks kind of require the number 2 pick? In which case, if Dylan Harper is in Milwaukee, I think that's probably a better situation for him early on. I mean, it may not be ideal because he's going to be put in a lot of very tough situations with, not a good roster, not a good roster for a rookie point guard to work with. But if he's in San Antonio, probably doesn't have the ball as much as you'd like. But we did see not a fully off ball role, but we saw De'Aaron Fox and Chris Paul sharing the ball at times in that, I guess, couple of week stretch, maybe like month long stretch that De'Aaron Fox was playing for the Spurs. So could there be some semblance of that maybe for a little bit? Sure. But I think there's a difference between Chris Paul and rookie Dylan Harper in the way that works.
Yeah, I think what we know now, San Antonio moving up to number 2, the price for Giannis Antetokounmpo just went up because now San Antonio has the ability, if they include the number 2 pick, if they include Stephen Castle, if they include the future picks that they have left, to be in contention with any offer out there, including what Houston could offer if they put Amen Thompson on the table with the young stars and picks that they have available. So if I'm Milwaukee, I'm now sitting in the catbird seat. If I am going to trade Giannis, to be able to push Oklahoma City, Houston, San Antonio, any number of teams who have been saving up their assets for this time, the price could continue to be pushed up because of the leverage that they're going to be able to have playing those teams across each other for all of the young assets that they have in play.
Absolutely unreal how stacked the West is going to be if Giannis also moves out west. And then we know there's probably going to be a couple teams out west, specifically Utah. They're going to be at the top of the lottery next year in a really good class. My goodness, it's going to be very unbalanced. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the number 3 pick in Philadelphia. And I tried to think of, I guess, other options here. And I tried to justify like a Colin Murray Boyles, but I just can't do it. I'm like looking down the board. I think I just have to go Ace Bailey here. I think that the idea of somebody like a Colin Murray Boyles would be, okay, you can fit into a starting 5 of Tyrese Maxey, Quentin Grimes, Paul George, CMB, and then Joel Embiid. But if I'm being honest, I don't think that you should be drafting with Paul George in mind. You should just be drafting hey, you have a number 3 overall pick. We can't stake our future on Paul George. He's too old. He didn't have a great season this past season. And then also the health of Joel Embiid as well. I think shooting for the stars here a little bit with Ace Bailey just makes sense. I'm not super high on him. I don't think he's like the definite number 3 prospect in this class. The measurements came out yesterday. He's not quite 6'10". He's like closer to I think it was like 6'7" something with no shoes on. So maybe like 6'9" with shoes on. Obviously hits a lot of tough shots and the playmaking is better than the numbers look. And then the defensive upside's there. So the tools are there. I'm just not super confident that Ace Bailey is going to be this superstar wing. But I think that if there is a player for him to learn from, maybe it's not the worst thing for him to, pick Paul George's brain here and there. And then he can be a nice 3-and-D option if he's willing to play that type of role on a playoff team.
Yeah, I when I looked at the draft as well, my initial thought with this was Daryl Morey's already shopping this pick. Like kind of where there's a bad fantasy manager in your league, he's already peppered Nico Harrison with trade offers to try to get up to number 1. I don't think he's going to be able to do that, but he's already tried. I guarantee it. He's going to try to move this. I don't think Ace Bailey is necessarily what Daryl Morey wants from this pick. I think the measurables, more so than the height, which I think we already kind of thought that he was probably closer in height to Cooper deeper flag than he was a true 6'10". So 6'8", closer to 6'9", somewhere around there. That's fine. I don't have an issue with that. He's got a good shot like that. That's not a question. The weight and the high-waisted frame is kind of what my issue is here. Only around 200 pounds. If you're 6'9" and only 200 pounds, you're extremely thin build. He's got shoulders that suggest he could put a little bit more weight on the frame, but he is high-waisted. The handle, it continues to be an issue. I think there's limitations here that even at that height, with the shot-making ability, there's a decent floor, but I don't think the ceiling is as high as people think. I think that the fit here also for fantasy, this is kind of the fantasy landmine in your rookie draft. I think a lot of people, if Ace Bailey goes number 3, whether it's to Philadelphia or somewhere else, people are going to gravitate toward just following draft order, take him at 3rd in the draft. There's going to be hype around him because, if you see a highlight package, Ace Bailey looks like the next star NBA wing. But the reality of his fantasy game is that it's not nearly as strong as what you would want. There's significant weaknesses from a 9-category perspective. Not a good free throw shooter. Not going to get you any assists. While he has some ability as a weak side shot blocker, there's not really going to be a lot of steals. You're really depending on him getting decent rebounding and scoring. That's going to be what is going to be able to be productive for him. But then you're kind of looking at a stat set that looks a little bit more like a Jabari Smith, maybe a Michael Porter Jr., a PJ Washington. That's not that exciting. And I think that that's not what people are expecting when they're taking Ace Bailey. I would not have him, especially if he's ending up in Philadelphia at number 3 in my rookie drafts. He's going to drop down below that for me. And I think that this is going to be an area where if you are a smarter manager, you're going to look to avoid this. You're going to look to move out of this pick. If you think people are really gravitating toward wanting to take Ace Bailey, that's not where I would go with it. And I think that's something you can plan for in advance and try to get out in front of.
Yeah, 100%. I don't think I would be taking him number 3 in my rookie draft either. I think from the fit here, I mean, there is a number of different options they could go with. I went with Ace Bailey for this one, but I don't love it for fantasy. I just think that's a realistic option for real life. If I can get some of these ads to go away, I can go on to the next pick. Who do you have? Go ahead and go with who do you have for number 4?
All right, at number 4, I think in real life, you would see Charlotte running to the podium to take VJ Edgecombe here. This is the perfect fit for the Charlotte Hornets to be able to put a player in between LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller. That is exactly what they need. He's going to be able to guard the other best perimeter player on the team. He's going to add energy and transition, defensive playmaking, and athleticism, and an ability to be able to attack the rim on closeouts. That's developing, catch and shoot three-pointers, which is exactly what Charles Lee wants from a complementary piece, to be able to add some defensive ability, but also to be able to hit the three. We saw him post some pretty solid catch and shoot three-point numbers this year, and I think that's going to be his role offensively on this team as well. But this would be a lock for the Hornets to take VJ Edgecombe at this pick. And from a fantasy perspective, he's going to be a big-time steals producer. He's going to be contending at least for second in steals in the league behind Dyson Daniels. That's kind of steal production that you're going to be able to get. Also be able to get you some blocks from a guard position, solid three-pointers, and doesn't really hurt you in anywhere other than the field goal percentage might not be that strong. But overall, really smooth 9-cat stat set, big spikes in steal numbers that's going to help you win that category. This is a good fantasy player in points leagues, not a great one. I think he's going to be solid because the minutes are going to be there, and that's going to be able to let him accumulate enough stats to be a solid to good points league producer. I like him a lot. I think I'll probably end up with some players that I like a little bit more from a fantasy perspective above him. So he might not be my number 3 player in rookie drafts, but he'll be right there at number 4, somewhere around there, because I really like where VJ Edgecombe is headed. I think a good fantasy comp might be a Jalen Suggs, where you're going to see him produce a stat set that isn't maybe the most exciting, but is going to give you really solid production across the board with some spikes in defensive playmaking and hitting some threes.
Yeah, I think just the fit here, the fact that he would be able to probably step in right as a starting shooting guard, and it fits with the lineup of LaMelo, VJ Edgecombe, Brandon Miller, Miles Bridges, Mark Williams. There's a lot of injury question marks there with obviously some of those guys, but I think it's a very talented lineup and would make him, the questions that I would have would be about him with the ball in his hands right now. I think that's something he can develop, but he wouldn't necessarily be relied on or required to have the ball in his hands a ton, or he would be able to do more, like you said, like catch and shoot stuff as opposed to having to self-create, because he has LaMelo Ball there creating. Miles Bridges and Brandon Miller can obviously get their own shots. So he'll have opportunities. And then it is a team that I think that if they are healthy, they can contend for a play-in spot and play competitive basketball, but also they would rely on the rookies to or the young guys to do that. So it wouldn't be this super tanking situation that would kind of, I guess, take away from his opportunities or could potentially lead to more opportunities if there is those injuries. But that is a scenario that we could see that we have seen with Charlotte in recent years. So could see a strong finish to the season for him if things go the way they have been in Charlotte with injuries.
Yeah, I think one final thing on Edgecombe is that a big development at the combine measurements that in shoes he's going to be 6'5". I mean, there was some concern that he might be more
Mm-hmm.
6'2" than 6'4" without
Yep.
shoes. That's great. And seeing that suggests that the upside for him, the highest end outcomes, the Victor Oladipo development outcomes are still a little bit more on the table, because if he was closer to 6'2", I think it would be harder to be able to see that. And it would also be a little bit more of a defensive limitation. That was a great development for him. And I think something that gives a lot of optimism for his career trajectory in the NBA.
All right. Now we've got the Utah Jazz, the worst record in the NBA, picking fifth. Let's see. I don't feel good about a guy like Trey Johnson because I feel like they already have a similar player, not in talent wise, but like play style and Keontae George, and they've just been taking dart throws on guards. I'm going to take Conk Nipple as somebody that can fit in and play a significant role and provide them with something that they don't necessarily have. They have a number of guys that are kind of point guards, kind of shooting guards. They have a number of players that can play in the post. They've got Kyle Filipowski and Walker Kessler down low. They've got John Collins, Lowry Markkinen. They've got, I mean, they really do have, I guess, some sort of prospect kind of everywhere. Bryce Sensabaugh on the wing. I just think that Conkinipple is a little bit of a different player than what they've drafted for in the past. Can also do a lot of things well, specifically as on offense, mostly with the shooting. I think he's still solid as a passer, a creator, can get into the paint fairly well, and then maybe not a terrible defender. So I think he can kind of fit in with this timeline. Has phenomenal upside as a shooter, and I think at this point it is kind of hard to say specifically for Utah other than they want a franchise player, and they're going to be tanking again next year to try and get that. But I think Knipple is a guy that can either or that can be kind of like a number 3 option on a very, very good team, but they don't have their number 1 or number 2 option yet. So I think he could fit long term with potentially whoever they add, hopefully for them, like a top 3 pick next year in a really talented class.
I think in the NBA, you're kind of in the wilderness until you have the answer of who your primary on ball creator is going to be. Utah does not have that yet. And I think if you're holding shares of Keontae George, of Isaiah Collier, what you likely have there are the guys who are holding the place for what the Utah Jazz are hoping to be able to draft next year. I think those players could potentially become, in Collier, a strong backup point guard in the NBA. Keontae George could become a nice bench scorer in the NBA, but I don't see them, because of shooting deficiencies in Collier, defensive deficiencies, or a complete lack of defense in Keontae George. There's issues from them being long-term starters. Adding Conkinipple here kind of sets the foundation for what they're hoping to be able to add in next year's draft. And I like it because he's one of the best shooters in this draft. I think there's more pick and roll operation ability here than what we saw at Duke. And we saw that when Cooper Flag was out in the ACC tournament. Conkinipple can do more with the ball than what we saw. And I think he will get the opportunity to be able to do that on top of the movement shooting that Utah likes to run in their scheme with Will Hardy. He'll be a good fit for that. This is kind of a really ideal fantasy situation for him because I think he'd come into big minutes right away. I think he'd have an opportunity to be able to play a significant offensive role here, maybe even more on ball than he would in other places, just because there's a lack of really strong on ball creation in this lineup. And I like the fit because when you're getting to this point in the draft, there are some bigger upside swings, but I can also understand Utah saying, we're going to be tanking again next year. We need to set the foundation for whatever our next star player is going to look like. Conkinipple is that foundational piece who's going to be a long-term starter next to the stars that Utah hopefully is able to find in the future.
Yeah, I mean, you're with who they have on their roster. I don't think you're drafting with the idea that, okay, like we want to avoid this position because of this player. Maybe there's a little bit of a log jam at certain positions to kind of avoid that, but I think Knipple doesn't kind of step on anybody's toes that I think you need to avoid stepping on their toes. I think that's, and then like you said, we'll get a lot of minutes early on. They just gotta they gotta get their star. hopefully they can get that next year for their sake so they can get kind of out of this bottom piece. But who do you have with the number 6 pick going to Washington?
Washington also kind of one of the most disappointed franchises, falling down to number 6 here. And I think that this is a tough one because I think there would be some consideration for Trey Johnson. Nice measurements for him, looking at to be 6'6" with a +5 wingspan. One of the best shooters in this draft, if not the best shooters in this draft. I think his on-ball creation ability is probably a little overstated. I don't think that's the ideal fit for him. I don't know if he's going to be the primary guy in an offense. I don't think you want him to be that. And I think that's probably the reason that Washington shies away from it. They might take him there. I think that's possible. But the fit that I really like here that I want to take is Derek Queen at number 6. And I love this for both real life and fantasy for a lot of reasons. Number one, Washington, you saw it last year. They like to get players who can dribble, pass, and shoot. And with Queen, you have that, and you have that developmental arc for him to be able to become a player who can kind of help in all three facets there. And he's in an ideal fit next to Alex Sarr because they kind of fit together like puzzle pieces. Their weaknesses are the other one's strengths. And with Queen, you would have someone who could rebound in a way that Alex Sarr has not shown an ability to be able to play a little bit on the interior. Not the strongest finisher, but certainly a stronger one than Sarr. He's going to be able to create offense, and Sarr is going to be able to help him cover up some of those defensive deficiencies while still spacing the floor and creating space for Queen to be able to operate inside of the arc with the ball. So I really like the interplay of those two players. If you're going to have Derek Queen, you want to be able to have a strong defensive infrastructure around him. It's similar to what we saw with Alperen Şengün in Houston, where it works, and we've seen a top 10 defense from Houston for the past 2 years, despite having Alperen Şengün out there for big minutes, because not only has Şengün improved in his role in that defense, but they also have the defensive infrastructure to fit. And when you see what they did with Bub Carrington, who I think he can be a plus guard defender, when you see Keyshawn George, Alex Sarr, Bilal Coulibaly, begin to see the vision of all the length and defensive intensity that they're going to be able to bring to the table if those players develop the way that I think they can. And Queen gives them that kind of offensive surge and the player who can create for them that I think they really need to be able to get, and an ideal fit to be able to mask some of the deficiencies that Alex Sarr has. I like this. I love it for fantasy. If this happens, and this might be a little bit of wish casting, but because of his fantasy stats, that this would push Queen up for me probably to be the number 3 player in rookie drafts. If he ended up in a slot like this, I think he'd get big minutes. The short-term production would be there. Long-term, I think this would be an ideal fit for him to be able to thrive. And I'd love to be able to get him after Cooper Flagg and Dylan Harper are off the board.
Yeah, and I don't think you're going to be the only one that's hoping for this to happen, because Bub Carrington has already talked about how him and Derek Queen grew up like 3 doors down from each other and have been good friends for a while. So I know that he's already going to be pushing for it as well. And I do think the fit there is a lot of fun, because we saw when Alex Sarr, like before he was drafted, there was the reports that he just did not want to play center, and that's why he didn't even want to work out for the Hawks. Or that was part of the reason. I don't know. I guess there was nothing fully confirmed other than he just didn't want to work out for the Hawks. But now he plays his rookie year and he spends most of it at center. So sure, maybe that's a good thing for his development, but now they can actually have this other player here who, even though he's smaller than Alex Sarr, would actually be kind of the true center. Not Jonas Valanciunas. He's not the center of the future. He's already obviously in Sacramento, but Derek Queen could kind of fill that role and immediately step into playing a lot. And we know that Washington's going to play their young guys. That's also another encouraging thing just for whoever lands in this spot, is that Washington is going to emphasize playing their rookies, playing their young guys, instead of, I guess, what some other teams trying to do and mix some veterans in there, which Washington will do. Just the emphasis is going to be on the young guys getting minutes.
Yeah, I think that Washington's going to be in a very similar developmental arc next season. A lot of these guys, underbaked, young prospects, they're not going to be that much better, but it's going to be fertile ground for whoever they do take at this pick, because I think it's going to be a more offense-heavy pick, someone who's going to have the ball in their hands more to be able to have a really big fantasy season, maybe an inefficient one, but I think Queen could be primed for a really big role as a rookie if he ended up in Washington.
Yep, and moving on to the number 7 pick with New Orleans. They sent Zion Williamson out to do the draft lottery. So I think that's maybe a little bit of more of a commitment to say, hey, he's going to still be here, which, I mean, that's kind of the way that I took it, is that, hey, we value him as our franchise player. Maybe he's not on the block this summer, but I think they tried to give him a center in the first round last year by getting Yves Missi. Not a great fit. I think that was kind of what we saw immediately, is that, hey, you have 2 non-shooters now. and this fit isn't going to be great. He's going to play a lot as a rookie because they don't have anybody else to play center, but it's not a great fit. I'm going to take Kamen Malawach as a guy that I hope can develop into the floor spacing center that would fit well next to Zion. I don't think he's going to be some hitting 2.5 threes per game type center, but a guy that can knock down a catch and shoot three. We saw him do that more with South Sudan than we did with Duke, because Duke didn't really. That's just what happens to me in college is they have all these centers just sitting on the block. They don't often allow them to space the floor. That happens a lot in college, but I think he has more shooting touch than he was able to show. And then obviously the rebounding is much better than I think what he did in the Final Four loss to Houston was much better all season, specifically on the offensive end to rebound on that end. And then as a shot blocker, just clean things up kind of in a mix, in a rotation with Yves Missi. I think that's kind of a dangerous center duo to have there, because you can have Yves Missi as more of a traditional pick and roll threat for DeJounte Murray. And then you can have Malawach as either a pick and pop guy or just a floor spacer, just somebody that can sit on the perimeter and draw out a center, more to create spacing than to actually be a guy hitting a number of threes per game.
Yeah, I have some concern about the Malawach as a 3-point spacer archetype. And I think that this is something from years of watching the draft that we can kind of fall in love with during the pre-draft process, because we begin to see these players in workouts putting up a bunch of threes. It's not a game environment. And when we saw it in a game environment, Malawach only put up 1.2 threes per 100 possessions for Duke, which is an extremely low percentile. It does not suggest that at least he was, either the team or he were confident enough in him having that kind of role. It's kind of like what we wanted Mo Bamba to become, and it just never happened, because ultimately these guys, maybe they can take trailer threes, maybe they can, be wide open and kind of have a really slow 3-point shot that isn't going to get contested if no one's out there, but is it really providing spacing? And I did not like the fit with Zion and Missi this season. I don't know if the Pelicans necessarily should be building around Zion anyway, but it's certainly worth another year to be able to figure out if it can work. And I think they're at least projecting that they have confidence in him. That's in their interest to do if they're looking to move him this offseason, to put him out there and project that they still believe in him. I would not be surprised at all if Joe Dumars came in from a mandate from ownership to move on from Zion Williamson this offseason, and I think we could see that. So we'll see. I think Malawach is potentially on the table here. And we'll just have to set aside the complications. You mentioned South Sudan. There is the complication with him that right now the U.S. government is denying visas to South Sudanese nationals. That could complicate Malawach's ability to be able to play and work in the United States. That's a situation that will need to get to be resolved at some point, and we don't know where that stands. But this is going to be a real inflection point in the draft. I think both the pick from Washington and the pick from New Orleans here at 6 and 7 are really going to determine where things head. With Malawach coming off of the board, it still leaves a lot of talent out there, but I think there were certainly some teams who could have been looking for a big later on who would have been interested as well. If he does end up there, I think Malawach is a strong fantasy option. Good rebound rate, good block rate, elite field goal percentage. This is going to be a player who threatens to be one of the top field goal percentage impact players in the entire NBA. A ton of dunks, able to finish at the rim because he's massive. And the combine measurements confirmed that yesterday. We're looking at a player who is 7'2", 253 pounds with a +6 wingspan, massive standing reach. He's going to be impactful defensively immediately, and has a little bit more hip fluidity than you would probably expect for someone that is that big. There's a lot of potential here for him as a finisher on the offensive end, as a defensive player, and maybe the 3-point spacing as well. So you can already kind of see the archetype in fantasy that you're going to be getting here that makes him a solid choice if he ends up in a place where it looks like he could be a starting center out of the gate, or at least have a big minute role. You know what kind of fantasy production you're going to be getting from this kind of player.
Yeah, maybe this is me, just the way that I look at drafts. It's like I'm looking at, okay, what can this player be? And it's oftentimes very different from the reality. So I guess drafting him with the hope that he can be a floor spacer, and then maybe if they do move on from Zion and have more of a Trey Murphy or Herb Jones, DeJounte Murray type of lineup that doesn't have this just full-on non-shooter in there, then maybe that fits a little bit better if Malawach isn't able to develop into the shooter that maybe I'm just overly optimistic that he can be. But Brooklyn is now on the clock with the number 8 pick. They have a million holes. Matt, how are you going to fill it?
All right. I think in this scenario, Brooklyn would be running the podium to take Trey Johnson. I think that he is probably the best shooter in this class, the best movement shooter in this class. I think that there's such a high floor with what he's going to be able to bring to the table. And Brooklyn is in desperate need to be able to get some scoring onto the floor. They have some pieces that I think can work on a playoff team, but they're a long ways away when it comes to being able to have a viable, anything close to even a top half NBA offense. And I think Trey Johnson is going to be a nice piece to be able to add that. Good size. I think that because of that size, being around 6'6", there's going to be potential for him defensively because he also has a nice plus wingspan. I get the knocks that he in that Texas offense looked like he was a little bit of a me first player. That was not a good situation. I think that this is a really good basketball player who's going to fit into the NBA from day one. Brooklyn would be smart to be able to take him. From a fantasy perspective, I'm not as excited. I think that this is the kind of player who gets you points and threes, and that's really about it. The free throw percentage will be helpful, but beyond that, there's not really a lot in the stat set. He'd be someone that I'd have lower probably than where he's going to go in his draft slot, just because this archetype, unless they're really having an incredible scoring season, just doesn't help you that much in points or categories leagues. So not someone that I'm looking to be able to take above draft slot or even at draft slot if he's going to be going in the top 8 picks, but someone that I think will likely go in the top 8 picks in the draft coming up in a month.
Yeah, I think Brooklyn is a really, really good fit for Trey Johnson. I know there's already been Cam Thomas comps, which makes that kind of interesting, the fact they would be on the same team. But I think Brooklyn is just in need of a player with superstar upside. And I think the best case scenario for Trey Johnson is that of a high level scorer. But I think just trying to fit him in with some of the other teams that we've already looked at, maybe he doesn't get that opportunity to see if he can develop into that because of who is already there. With Brooklyn, I don't think that they have too many pieces that are high volume, need the ball in their hands, that are also going to be significant parts of their future. So I think this is a great spot for him to kind of just develop as a scorer and just see what he can be, how good he can be, but also maybe improve defensively. We saw Jordy Fernandez do a really good job with a not very talented roster. And so maybe he can help Trey Johnson, help develop him into a not a minus defender and just to be a league average, maybe even a little bit better than league average defender, which could be very good for him long term and to just becoming a star level player. But you're right, as far as fantasy, he's not a great category league option. So maybe in points leagues, but the category league is just not going to give you too much. And it's probably going to be a really bad field goal percentage in year one.
Yeah, and even for points leagues, you're not getting rebounds, you're not getting
Yeah.
assists. So like you're really living and dying by big points totals to be able to lift you up, and that's just so inconsistent to deal with. In points leagues, you really want to be able to get players who give you that foundation of rebounds and assists every game, so you're not having to depend on big scoring nights or
Sure.
getting outlier defensive playmaking where you get 4 steals in a game and that boosts you up. The consistent players, the players who win you weeks, are the players who give you those points, rebounds, and assists at levels that are consistent, so you can depend on that game after game.
All right. Now we've got Toronto on the clock, and I'm going to just keep looking because I'm not sure exactly who I like here with this one. Because they have, let's see, they have Scotty Barnes, they have Emmanuel Quickly, they have RJ Barrett. They've just drafted a couple guys in the first round that are shooters, such as Jacoby Walter and Grady Dick. They've added Brandon Ingram. They have Jakob Pertl. So there's not exactly to me like a glaring need based on what they want to do next season. I'm not going to go Colin Murray Boyles because I feel like that doesn't fit super well with Scotty Barnes. I'm going to go Thomas Sorber, who is a player that I really like. I know the foot injury is probably a bit of a question mark there, but I think does a lot of things well, can hit mid-range shots good in the post, good rebounder, a little bit of an undersized center, but still strong physical, good passer for a big. He was able to get stocks. I think that the foot injury is a question mark there that I was trying to research and see what I could find more about, but I couldn't find too many updates. So hopefully there's some clear updates from the team or after some sort of draft combine. They're able to give a better indication of if this is going to be a major issue for him. But I think that, maybe you don't obviously look at Jakob Pertl as a center of the future, but a very high level player. And I think Sorber can come in and be, I guess, worth the upside to kind of take the risk on him with the top 10 pick, because I think the high end outcome for him could actually be a really, really dynamic big that could fit well with what they have already.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of mock drafts, and I've seen it so far. Common Malawach going to Toronto is going to be a common
Mm,
theme. But if he does go to New Orleans like he did here, you could definitely see Toronto looking to add another center. This, I think, the second best center prospect in this draft, and I think it's pretty close actually. I could see the argument for Sorber over Malawach, so
mm,
that this could be a strong possibility here. This is also a scenario right now on the board that we could see play out on draft night, where we have a couple of the top point guard prospects in this draft, Kasparis Yakachonis and also Jeremiah Fears, available. And while you do have Emmanuel Quickly on this roster, Quickly's kind of a little bit more of a combo guard. There's a potential there
yeah.
that could come into play with Toronto's pick as well. Or they could just continue the trend of taking guys who are around 6'8" and 6'9" and can't shoot.
I
We'll
thought
see
about
it.
it.
It's always a possibility with Masai. But in this scenario where they take Sorber, I really like Sorber. I think that he's a player who could have a lot of helium in rookie drafts. You're looking at a player who, in the measurements that came out yesterday from the combine, I think it was one of the better outcomes that we saw. 6'10", 263 pounds. He is a tank. This is a really thick center who's going to be able to handle the physicality of the NBA immediately. It's a little bit more of an old school build in that way,
Hmm.
but he's got a +9 wingspan. I mean, like the +9, that kind of wingspan is going to put him into contention for one of the longest wingspans and a solid standing reach in the NBA. I think he's going to be a really good defensive center, but he also showed some really nice ability as a playmaking hub, some good passing vision, and an ability to be able to score and have some touch around the basket as well. He uses that length really well around the basket on both offense and defense. I think he's going to be a good starting center for a long time in the NBA. I really like Thomas Sorber. I would like this pick, and he'd be a player that I'd be taking above his draft slot in rookie drafts.
Yeah, I'll be hoping that he falls a few extra picks past this one to Atlanta. But I think as far as the Emmanuel Quickly, I did kind of think about that. I think I see Emmanuel Quickly as a guy that has the upside to break out, and I thought he would have this past season if he was healthy, but it didn't really work out. I think maybe Toronto having a little bit more of a competitive team. Hopefully, they have injury luck on their side. Maybe we see that. I don't think that should prevent them totally from taking a point guard here as well. But I really do like Sorber's upside, kind of regardless of where he ends up. Um, and I think maybe what he did in college is going to be more attractive to fantasy managers more so than maybe I guess real life analysts or like that are not as worried about the box score stats. But I think what he did, and also on top of him being a really good player, I think it's also going to be extra attractive to fantasy managers. But Houston's now on the clock. They're going to be looking to add someone to help them get out of the first round next year on this very talented young team. Matt, who are they adding?
Yeah, Houston is a franchise that we've seen in the draft just take best player available. They take talent in the draft and they figure it out later. I think that's putting them in the position this offseason to have a lot of talented young players that they're going to be able to potentially move for another star piece to put them over the hump in the playoffs next year. I think they continue the trend here of taking best player available. This is a very analytical front office, and when you have that more of a mindset, the player that jumps off the page here is Colin Murray Boyles. Now, I understand they've already got Amen Thompson. They have Tari Eason. They have players who fit this kind of role, and that's exactly what Ime Udoka likes. And while I could understand people saying, well, this isn't a need, there aren't really strong needs on this team that are available at this point in the draft. Yes, you could see them try to take a Kasparis Yakachonis or a Jeremiah Fears, but I don't think that's a fit for what Ime Udoka wants to do. And I do think that this franchise still believes in Reed Shepherd. I heard Sam Vecini talking about that last night, that his sources inside of the Houston Rockets, they still strongly believe in what Reed Shepherd is going to get for them. It wasn't a fit in his first year. He's going to be able to fit in there going forward. I think that that's not someone they're going to be looking to draft over here. Adding Colin Murray Boyles gives them another piece that fits into the exact kind of mentality that Ime Udoka wants defensively in Houston. And this is going to be a plus fantasy player who's going to be able to contribute immediately, even if he's coming out in a bench role, similar to Atari Eason, who I loved in the draft from a fantasy perspective when he was a player who was coming in outside of the lottery to take above his draft slot. I would take Colin Murray Boyles above his draft slot because of the defensive playmaking. He's going to be able to get you steals and steals, blocks, big rebounds, strong field goal percentage. He can score around the basket. yes, it is an unconventional game. Yes, he does not stretch the floor yet. I think that could come with time to some degree. But Colin Murray-Boyles is going to have a role immediately as a defensive chaos creator. He's going to be able to fit into this Houston team immediately, and he'd be my pick at number 10.
Yeah, I think it's going to take a very specific fit for Colin Murray-Boyles to really get maximized. I think he has the ability to be an incredibly impactful player, both in real life and in fantasy. I think the way that the lottery shaped out is why he almost slipped to 10 for us, because I think that had some of these more win now teams been kind of picking it a little bit later, we probably could have seen him go a little bit earlier. But I think that this is going to end up being a great fit because he is going to be able to make an impact from day one on an already very good defensive team. And if they do make some sort of roster shakeup this summer where they are moving on from a couple of their younger players, then that opens up even more minutes from him or for him from day one to make an impact both ends of the floor. But also he's not going to be asked to do a ton offensively immediately, so he'll have time to develop that aspect of his game if he does go to a team more like a Brooklyn where there's, I guess, almost like a vacuum of who's going to step up and be the offensive star. Oh, this guy that we just drafted in the top 10, we want to see what you can do. Maybe he doesn't, play super well in that role immediately, but with Houston, I think he does fit flawlessly.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm really excited to see what Houston does this offseason because there is a logjam here that needs to be fixed. I mean, you have not only are they going to have to make a decision on Tari Eason with an extension, they're going to have Cam Whitmore, who's just kind of languishing, Reed Shepard, who's going to need to be able to get minutes. And you're going to have more opportunity for more rookie draft picks coming in the next couple of years as well. That just isn't going to be there. They're not going to have minutes for them. So it's time in some way to be able to consolidate. I think they will. There's going to be a path that they're going to need to be able to take to do that.
All right. Now we've got Portland, who I guess kind of like some of the other teams we've talked about have had a number of early picks recently and guys that they still want to build with. I think that the most valuable pieces that they have, Denny Avdia, Shaden Sharp, Scoot Henderson, and Donovan Clingan, who they drafted last year. I think that I'm going to go Kasparis Jakusionis, almost like a safety valve for potentially Scoot not being what we think he can be. And if he does, then I think Jakusionis as a playmaker that can shoot as well could also fit well. He's like a bigger guard, could fit alongside Scoot Henderson, kind of do opposite things, and just kind of have that upside. I think also maybe not super similar, but like does some similar things to Denny Avdia as far as being a good, bigger playmaker. Just an interesting wrinkle to throw in there. And I think Portland, it's such an interesting situation because they have a number of players where we think it can work out. They also have a couple of veterans where it's like, why are they still getting minutes? They're talented. Just trade them to a competitive team so that we can maximize the minutes for these young guys. So I think Jackson Jonas is just kind of another dart throw for them. And he has plenty of upside and could be just a tall playmaker, which is, I guess, kind of what he's projected to be, as well as just a really good shooter.
Yeah, I like this. If Kasparis Jakusionis falls down to number 11, I think this makes a lot of sense because it insulates the Trailblazers on both Shaden Sharp and Scoot Henderson in their development. Yep. Because I think there's a future where Kasparis Jakusionis can play both on ball and off ball because of his shooting, ability to be able to take tough contested threes, to be able to take threes off of the dribble. He can fit with his size next to Scoot or next to Shaden. If they both work out, great. That's a great problem to be able to have. If one of them doesn't in their development work out long-term as a starter, then I think he can fit next to either one of them. And that makes a lot of sense because what you do have in Portland is a defensive infrastructure that it's going to be able to insulate whoever those primary on-ball creators are going to be on the perimeter. To be able to have Tamani Kamara, Denny Avdia, and Donovan Clingan is the beginning of a really strong defense. And I think that's why you saw this team surge in the second half, because those players add such a great foundation defensively that if you can get a functional offense, which they started to get from Avdia with improvements from Shaden Sharp throughout the back end of the season, that allowed them to be able to start winning some basketball games. Now, is Anthony Simons going to be part of this? Maybe they're just going to keep him forever because we've been thinking that he was going to get traded, that Jeremy Grant was going to get traded, that DeAndre Ayton might be out the door. It just hasn't happened. They've just stood pat with it. We just got an extension for Chauncey Billups. So I don't know if they're ever going to do anything. I think they're just going to probably continue to keep drafting players at the back end of the lottery and continue to hope to make the play-in every season. But there's an idea here of a team that if they ever decided to move forward with their youth, that I think is starting to actually make sense. A concept of a team that actually makes sense instead of the two different different timelines that don't really work that they have right now. And I like to be positive the way that the season finished, but this team needs to be able to cut the umbilical cord when it comes to moving on with their young team, getting rid of some of these bigger salaried older players. Ayton is going to be on an expiring contract, so he's going to be out at some point. Maybe they can move him to be able to clear space, but this team continues to make no sense in the way that they're built. I hope that this draft, sees them make some moves to be able to start moving toward the future rather than lingering in the mediocrity of the present.
Yeah, kind of echoing everything you just said about Portland, we'll move on to Chicago, another team who's also kind of refused to make some moves. They finally did make a trade this past season, but have been kind of competing for a play-in spot. But they've actually been in the play-in because it's the East as opposed to the West. Chicago has the number 12 pick. They've got a couple young pieces to kind of build around, but are those pieces we want to build with? Matt, who do you got Chicago taking?
All right. This team is going to be now built around what I think will be a contract extension to Josh Giddey that I think in some ways he earned through the second half of this season. We saw a more physical Josh Giddey using his size again to his advantage, not playing timid the way that he did at the start of the season, taking more confident, wide open three-pointers that other teams give him, and thriving in kind of the lower competitive level of the post-All-Star period. We've seen that from Giddey before. That's happened last year in Oklahoma City. Near the end of the season, once the competition level dropped after the All-Star break, kind of from that February onward period, Giddey looked a lot better. People talked themselves into it, and then it didn't work in the playoffs. We kind of saw the same thing this year. Some of the best play that we saw from Giddey all season in his career, to be fair. And then in the play-in game, kind of all the weaknesses got exposed. And that will probably happen again to some degree, but I think the commitment to him will be there. So how do you build a team around Josh Giddey? Well, you need defense at the other positions to be able to compensate for what he's not going to be able to give you on that end, so he doesn't get played off of the floor the way that he did early in the season when Billy Donovan was completely unwilling to close with him and took him out at various points because he couldn't do an NBA rotation defensively. So I think my choice here, and a guy that I think we're hearing has not been high enough in mock drafts that NBA GMs like a lot more than the way that some of the draft analysts thought. Carter Bryant out of Arizona, I think would be the pick that I would take here. 3-and-D, good size. The measurements were at least what we thought from Carter Bryant coming out yesterday. Looks like he's going to be around 6'7" and shoes 215 pounds, +5 wingspan. Was able to knock down a good number of catch and shoot threes for Arizona this year. Had a limited role, but I think there's a little bit more to him than what we were able to see in his freshman season for the Wildcats. I really like him. I think he's going to go in the back end of the lottery at least coming up next month. And he's a player that would be a perfect fit to be able to fit around kind of what Chicago is lacking at this point. They don't have a defensive anchor at center. They don't have really any kind of defensive anchor on the perimeter. Bryant has an ability to be able to guard smaller players on the perimeter and also to be able to play a role on offense that is complementary to what they already have. I love him for Chicago. That probably means Chicago won't take him because I never like what Chicago does, but this is an opportunity for them to be able to do it. And hopefully this is who they take to be able to improve their fortunes for next season and beyond.
Yeah, he's definitely a player that I've seen rise up draft boards. I think I've seen him go as high as 9. I can't remember where I saw that, but Carter Bryant's definitely going to be a high upside wing, which is, if we look at teams that are winning in the playoffs right now, all of them have a high level wing that's playing both sides of the floor. And so I think it's just always been, or has been at least for a little while now, a coveted piece in the NBA. So him having that upside, and I think he'll be, like, the defense is definitely there. And now it's just on the offense to kind of get there. Definitely a good pick here for Chicago. I was kind of hoping he'd fall one more spot to make my life a little easier, but now I've got the Hawks with the 13th pick, and I think that they have a couple of different directions they can go because they'll also have pick 22. Just looking through the board here. I think I don't love this, but I'm going to go Jeremiah Fears. And I think the reason for this is the Hawks have had not one issue. They've had a lot of issues, but one consistent issue throughout Trae Young's tenure with the team is that they haven't had a very good backup point guard. They've cycled through every veteran. Like, I mean, I think I was talking about it yesterday because I was doing the Hawks show. Rajon Rondo spent time. Lou Williams spent time. Jeremy Lin spent time. Jeff Teague spent time. this past season. Karis LeVert was spending time. It was even down to Keaton Wallace. I think Kobe Buffkin maybe could still be that guy, but that was a different GM that drafted him. So now it's a new regime. So maybe, now the front office doesn't believe in him the way they did when the front office drafted him 2 years ago. So it could be that they're like, okay, let's try and actually figure this out. We have 2 first-round picks this year. We feel pretty good about our starting lineup. Let's solve this issue so that when Trae Young is off the floor, the offense is not abysmal, because that's just been such an issue. Jalen Johnson, I think, can help with that, but I think actually having a point guard then come in, and I love Jeremiah Fears' upside. I think that there is definitely issues. He is a younger guard, so maybe they would be looking for someone that is a little older, a little bit more ready to contribute right now. But I think the upside there also, I don't know if the front office wants to prepare for this, but the idea that Trae Young may ask out, and then you have this young point guard to potentially fill those shoes if that happens, because they do still have a nice young core here. Maybe they're shying away from that idea because they're afraid of saying, hey, if we draft a point guard with number 13, then maybe that's going to piss Trae Young off. I think that it's probably worth the risk, just for the fact that he can learn from Trae Young, both Oklahoma guys, and then helps regardless of where the team goes after this upcoming season.
Yeah, I think Fears is one of the players in this draft that has some of the widest range of outcomes. I mean, we could see him come off the board in that kind of like Utah, Washington, New Orleans, Brooklyn zone. Or he could end up dropping down. And the problem is there are a bunch of teams kind of at the back end of this lottery that maybe don't have the strongest point guard need. But there is so much potential in Jeremiah Fears. He reclassified, super young prospect, comes into Oklahoma, into the SEC, and is kind of running the entire offense is going through him. And he's able to get to a rim attempt at will on the court. Great handle, ability to be able to get to his spots, ability to be able to get to the rim. The shooting is still a work in progress. Strong free throw percentage that suggests that maybe there's better things to come from a three-point shooting perspective, but solid playmaking. I think that he's a good point guard prospect and someone that some team is going to take a chance on in the lottery, whether it could potentially be some teams trading in. I could see Orlando wanting to trade in to be able to get a Jeremiah Fears. There could be potential for that to be able to happen. There's some teams that might want to trade back in. Maybe Brooklyn trades back in with the extra picks that they have to come into the back end of the lottery to be able to get someone like Fears if he drops. So I think Atlanta, that could make perfect sense. The Kobe Buffkin experiment, he just can't stay healthy. So they've tried to add a guard to be able to be a complementary piece. Bogdanovich is out now. Karis LeVert, maybe have a little bit more time with him, but it's unlikely that there's the other on-ball creation piece other than Jalen Johnson point forward minutes that really exist right now in Atlanta. They need to be able to add something there. And I think at this point, Fears makes sense as taking that kind of swing for Atlanta. From a fantasy perspective, I like him. It's kind of your prototypical guard stats. At the field goal percentage isn't probably going to be that great, but he's going to be able to get you assists, steals, solid free throw percentage. And then you hope that the three-point shot develops, because if the shooting comes, then everything kind of unlocks for Fears. The measurements, there was a little bit of a concern that he might be too small. He's still small in the sense that he's only 180 pounds, but it looks like he's going to be 6'3" in shoes, which should be enough for him to be able to be successful in the NBA without it being too much of an anchor on him. I like him. I'm really interested to see where he goes on draft night.
Yeah, I'm hoping that he goes earlier than this and that he can get into a place where he can start. But the way the board shook out for us, I'm not too upset because I really do like Jeremiah Fears, and he goes to the Hawks. So that's fun for me. Last pick of the lottery, the second pick for the Spurs. Who knows if they'll even have this pick, but in the scenario that they do, who do you have them taking that?
This one's really interesting because I think the Spurs are in a position for this to kind of be a luxury pick. They don't need they can swing for the fences on this, or they can try to take someone who they think fits in long term. The goal here needs to be who are going to be the star role players that are part of the next Spurs championship team next to De'Aaron Fox, Dylan Harper, if they end up not making a trade with Victor Wembanyama. That's really what they're looking for. So who are going to be the players, the Derek Whites, the Aaron Gordons, who kind of become star role players that fit in on a championship team for them. And I think there's a lot of different directions that they could go here. Noah Essengay is a really interesting power forward type, kind of in a similar to a Jeremy Sohan mold, maybe even more athletic, not really able to shoot yet, but there's a lot of clay there to be able to mold that I could see them wanting to take on that kind of project because of the defensive ability, because of the athleticism and what he can mold into, having a strong finish to his season. But I'm going to go with an older prospect, someone that I think could fit in really well on the wing, Neek Clifford coming out of Colorado State. The shooting really made a big leap this season. If that's able to hold, then you have a player who I think is going to be able to fit in really well long-term with his size on the wing for San Antonio and being kind of an ideal fit around Victor Wembanyama and the gravity that he takes up on a basketball court. With Neek, he's a little bit of an older prospect at 23 years old, but 6'6", 200 pounds with a +3 wingspan. From a fantasy perspective, this is a guy who's going to be able to contribute, I think, in 4 categories, bringing you points, 3-pointers, rebounds, and assists. One of the stronger rebounders for his size that you'll see in college basketball, and also showed a lot of playmaking ability at Colorado State this season. Someone that I really like in fantasy drafts, but also in real life, and I think could be a really strong choice for the Spurs, especially if they're making a trade that sees them shedding some of their depth on the wing. If Devin Vassell has to be a matching salary piece to go out the door, if Keldon Johnson is a matching salary piece to go out the door this offseason, if they make a big star move, someone like Neek Clifford, I think, could come in and contribute right away on the wing for them and fill that role and be able to be that complementary piece to their star players.
Yeah, what I'm getting out of just this whole exercise that San Antonio is set up very well to make a number of different moves, and they like whether they trade both their picks, keep one, or keep both, like they're going to be able to get some high level players that are going to be able to contribute from day one, both and a young guy like a Dylan Harper and an older prospect like Nick Clifford that can just step in, be NBA ready, which is kind of what this team needs. They've had the whole, I guess, add a bunch of young guys time. Now they need players that are going to be able to make this team a contending team, not like just the play in or playoff team is almost an expectation at this point. Had they been healthy this year, they could have potentially done that, but now they have De'Aaron Fox, year 3 Wemby. I think Nick Clifford is a really good fit as a older prospect that can just step into a role from day one, no matter who they need to trade. Because like you mentioned, it could be Devin Vassell, it could be Keldon Johnson, it could be Stephon Castle, it could be the number 2 pick. Anything that they end up doing, I think he's a guy that can come in and fill a role from day one.
Yeah, I agree. And looking at the way that this board played out, there's some really interesting prospects still available that we haven't even had a chance to talk about. Danny Wolf, I think a lot of people are already mocking him to go number 15 to Oklahoma City. I could absolutely see that it fitting into that dribble, pass, and shoot mold that Oklahoma City's always looking to have to be able to fit into their offense. That can make a lot of sense. Jaeger Demon is someone who I think could have a ceiling as high as the late lottery and be in consideration for some of these teams at the back end of the lottery, or he could fall down, further into the second half of the draft because of the concerns of him being able to score in the half court. We haven't talked about Asa Newell, who I think is kind of unfortunately fitting into that 4-5 tweener role, but there's certainly potential there for a young prospect that you could see someone wanting to be willing to take a chance on him. And I really also like the way that Nolan Traore has finished the season in Europe. Was someone who was considered maybe as a potential top 5 pick at the beginning of the season, really struggled early on, but has come on strong since then. And teams who are looking for a point guard prospect, I could see him potentially being a late lottery pick, being kind of the player just going outside of the lottery for some of the teams who do have a point guard need or looking to be able to add some on-ball creation. Nolan Traore could be a really nice fit in that range as well.
Yeah, a lot of talented players still on the board, but this is obviously how our lottery shook out. If you're watching, you're able to see it. If not, I'm just going to quickly go through the players in order of who we drafted. Number 1, we went Cooper Flagg, and then it went Dylan Harper, Ace Bailey, VJ Edgecombe, Con Knipple, Derek Queen, Common Malawatch, and then pick 8 for Brooklyn, we went Trey Johnson, Thomas Sorber, Colin Murray Boyles, Kasparis Jakusionis, Carter Bryant, Jeremiah Fears, and then wrapping up the lottery, we went with Nick Clifford. So that's just a lottery mock one day after the lottery. I'm sure we will do longer mocks at some point and then maybe try and make it more digestible if we do 30 picks so that we're not talking for 3 hours, or maybe we do 59 picks. I don't know. We'd probably end up doing a 4-hour show if we end up doing that. Maybe just the first round one, and then obviously eventually some dynasty rookie mocks. But we're going to be able to do that because you're going to be able to find Matt here every Tuesday. We're going to be having him on to do a dynasty episode every Tuesday. So you're going to do not miss Matt Lawson Tuesday. It's going to be a lot of fun to just continue to dive in. It's dynasty topics from rookies to maybe we'll talk about just top 25 players in dynasties. We'll hit on it all summer, and then we'll see how long we keep doing it. Maybe we even do it during the season, live Q&A stuff. A lot of opportunities for us, but very excited that Matt, you'll be joining us on Tuesdays.
I'm looking forward to it. I love having this platform with you. I love talking dynasty with you. And I think there's so much that we're going to be able to get into in the coming weeks. I mean, not only getting ready for your rookie drafts and dominating those, but this is the prime part of the season where you can take advantage of everyone kind of being locked into the way that things just happened in the recent season instead of seeing where things are going. And so much changes every year, but the way that our brains work, people don't think that there's going to be dramatic change, or they think that everyone's going to kind of just have linear improvement or decline. But that's not the way that the NBA ever goes. There are huge changes in roles, minutes, opportunities, and we're already seeing it with some of the massive injuries that are going to impact the 25-26 season for star players. So that creates huge vacuums of opportunity and usage that are going to be opportunities for people to swoop in and see where things are headed. And we're going to be able to help you do that in your dynasty drafts. I can't wait to do it. Can't wait to be back every Tuesday. Looking forward to having those conversations with you.
Yeah, and with the way things change, that's why it's great that we're going to be able to check in weekly to keep everybody up to date on everything that goes on. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Young Man Squad Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Obviously, follow Matt at NBA Dynasty ADP. You can like, subscribe, share this, and I will try and get this out as quickly as possible with graphics, fun stuff to post all over social media so that we can probably argue with more people all over Twitter just to keep us busy for the rest of the day.
Thanks, Noah.
So, yep. Thank you, Matt. And we will see you guys next time.